Everything from Maximum PC here at E3 2015. I'm here at Oculus's meeting room speaking with Ted Price, the one of the founders of Insomniac Games. Is that right?
Yeah.
And Ted, what are you doing here at the Oculus booth? What are you guys working on?
We're showing off Edge of Nowhere, which is a brand new action adventure.
Okay, and can you tell us a little bit about the title?
Yeah, you are in Antarctica searching for a missing expedition, and you're hiking, climbing through the Antarctic mountains, and you begin to discover a surreal world, a world that's a little twisted and gets stranger and stranger as you journey deeper into the unknown.
Yeah, I was playing it earlier. I think it's one of the best AAA VR games out there, if not the best. And I sort of like I wrote something about it earlier today and sort of described it as an adventure platformer game. From the little that I've played,
Yeah.
sort of akin to Uncharted and Tomb Raider.
Right.
Were you guys influenced by those games at all? It's a third-person platformer adventure.
Sure. I
jumper
mean,
game.
we play all games, and as you know, we've made a lot of third-person action games.
Oh yes, yeah.
So
The Ratchet and Clank games.
that's right. We've made Ratchet
Right.
and Clank. We made Sunset Overdrive,
Yeah.
first-person shooters, Resistance. But this one is not all action, in-your-face action. There's stealth involved. There is a lot of exploration as well. We want to create that sense of isolation and unease that comes from being in the Antarctic and discovering some of the strange things that you will encounter.
Yeah, like I described it as sort of frozen landscape tundra with sort of adventure explorer, cave climber type of person, but with a sort of like almost there's a Cthulhu-like horror element going on. Can you touch upon that a little bit?
The game is definitely inspired by Lowcraft, in
Okay,
particular
right.
at the Mountains of Madness. And we know that there's a large fan base out there, including ourselves, who love the Lovecraftian horror vibe. And so we're riffing off of that, and players will get to discover a lot of very strange things in the game as a result.
So would you describe it as a scary horror type game, or is it more of an adventure? Like, can someone who is your goal to make it as scary as possible, or is it more atmosphere? Like, can someone who is not a big fan of scary games play the game, you think?
Yeah, this isn't necessarily a full-on
Like Silent Hill type of
scare
thing?
you every minute
Okay.
type game. There's a lot of exploration and discovery involved too, and we're building a world where I believe players will want to delve deeper into it to see what's around the next corner. And what's great about VR though too is there are opportunities to really take advantage of what you can do with the camera and explore in a more interesting way than we can in more traditional games.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was at the Oculus Step Into the Rift event last week, and Oculus announced that they were working on a bunch of working with developers on a bunch of new titles, and it was interesting because like most of the games that they showed were actually in third person, and your game is in third person. I think prior to that, most people thought most experiences were going to be in the first person. Can you sort of talk about your decision to choose third person for VR?
We make a lot of third-person action games, and so we wanted to leverage our experience in VR and take on the challenge of making a third-person game in VR. And we learned a lot very quickly. We learned a lot about what not to do at the beginning. For example, we learned very quickly that when you take camera control away from a player, it can be uncomfortable. With third-person, if you are controlling a character that is in front of you, it's very important to let the player have control of the camera and not mess with that. Another aspect of making a third-person game is that you get this really interesting connection between the player and the character on the screen when you are in third person. Whether that's us allowing you to go and inspect your character very closely, or feeling the same thing you believe your character would feel as he's hanging from one hand off of a railing looking down into a chasm, or climbing up an ice cliff, or being pursued by these really strange creatures.
Yeah, I think I described it as an outer body experience almost.
Yeah.
Or you feel, I mean, obviously you're controlling the character, but it really feels like you have like a bird's eye view of him at all times, and you're there with him in the cave as he's, going down that rope into the ravine or whatnot.
Right.
Is the game is VR exclusive? Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Would it be possible to port this game over to a traditional, flat screen type of environment?
We built this game from day one as a VR game, and we have been thinking through the design with VR in mind. So everything we do is with the intent that a player will be wearing a headset and using 3D audio with headphones. So I think you could probably take any VR game and work on it enough that it could be ported, but that's not our interest.
So what are some examples that you can give that sort of leverage the fact that it's going to be more optimal in VR? Like, is there an example you can use?
Some simple examples. I mean, during the demo, when you're walking through the cave, there's one point where you're looking at a rope. When you grab onto the rope, you get this great experience of going down into this dark hole and then looking up and seeing creatures crawling down after you. Those are just simple things that in a more traditional game would be just another thing that you do, but in VR it becomes much more immersive and feels like you're really there and feeling that sense of unease as you are hanging precariously on this rope.
Okay. You guys are doing a horror type, game, and from my experiences of using VR, I have a DK2 at home, and I've tried, several scary games and Alien Isolation, things like that. Do you think that VR enhances the fear factor? For me, I feel like it adds a certain level of danger to the experience, which is more immersive.
I think VR can enhance the fear factor if it's done right. I think that if, like any form of media, if you are turning things up to 11 all the time, then you start to lose the impact that various events have. And in VR, it's exactly the same, whether it's you're talking about a game that's scary or a game that's funny or a game that is action-packed. So what we try to do is pace things so that players will get into the world, connect with their character, and then be surprised by something, whether that's a new discovery in the game or being scared out of their wits because something just happened that they didn't expect.
Speaking about the pacing, it might be too early on to ask right now, but is the pacing of VR different than traditional mediums?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer yet.
I guess you'll probably find out once you release the game, you get feedback and things like that.
Well, we're learning
more
as we
intimately.
go, really. This is new territory for us and for most developers who haven't been able to work in VR. So pacing, I think the easiest answer is pacing is just as important in VR as it is in great traditional games.
Okay. Is it harder to develop for VR because you're not looking at a flat monitor? So is it more inconvenient that you have to put on the headset? Like, is the scaling of this right? Are those factors?
Sure. Anytime you adopt new hardware,
Yeah.
it's important for everybody on the team to be using that hardware. And if you don't have enough, then it can be challenging. However, not everybody is playing the game 24/7. We spend a lot of time building our assets and programming and doing concepts. And when it comes to testing, we absolutely have to be wearing the headsets to make sure that it feels right, that we're not doing anything too ridiculous with the camera, and that the moments that we envisioned being impactful really are in the game. You can't get that if you're just looking at a PC screen or a TV and assuming that this cliff is as intimidating as you think it is until you put the headset on.
Yeah, it's more like, I was thinking about it from your guys' perspective, the developer's perspective, and it's more like, looking at a flat screen versus actually, so looking at a flat screen of Antarctica or the Arctic or versus actually being there.
I think audio, you already pointed this out, but it's not just putting the headset on, it's making sure the audio is working well too, and that the audio is in 3D.
Yeah.
Especially in VR, when you can use 3D cues to draw the player's attention, it's very, very effective. And it reminds you that you're in a world, right? You can't do this in a more traditional game and see something behind you. But you can in VR, and that's where the sound really helps.
Yeah, I mean your game was the first demo that I've tried for Oculus for this headset, and the first thing that I did was I heard like wind blowing in the background, and the first thing that I did was I turned. So it was blowing from the left, and the first thing I did was I turned to the right so that it would, I'm like, am I going to hear the wind on the right? And yes, it did. Yes, it happened to be the case.
Yeah.
Are you guys doing interesting things with audio?
Absolutely. And in a game like Edge of Nowhere, audio is incredibly important. From the ambience to the audio cues that help you understand what might be around the next corner or what might be above you. So we spend a lot of time on that. Plus, it's a more atmospheric game in that it's not a. If you think about Ratchet and Clank had a driving score and lots of really kind of over the top sound effects. We take a more subtle approach here because we want you to feel like you're in Antarctica and you're isolated and you're potentially worried about what's going on around you.
Speaking of audio, I mean, Oculus said that you'd be able to plug your own, headset in. Is there anything that you guys have to do to, program it so that it, works with a wide variety of headsets, or is it the API kind of takes care of that type of stuff? How does that
You're
work?
asking the wrong guy because I'm not working on that aspect of the game.
Okay, gotcha. How long do you think the game will be when it's done?
We'll have to tell you when we're finished.
Okay, I mean, do you think that there's a sweet spot or anything like that? Do people want to sit down and play, 20-hour games, or is it more short experiences?
That's a good question. I think that's something we're all discovering at this point. Again, this is new territory for most people.
Okay, and then when can users expect to play the game?
We haven't announced a release date yet. So, you're asking a lot of the questions that traditionally we don't answer until we actually come out and announce launch dates, more features for the game.
Gotcha.
So I'm just excited that people here at E3 got to try it out and had what we believe is a really good experience.
Okay, and I guess last question, VR, lots of people haven't tried it. Lots of people think it's a gimmick. Is it here to stay?
So I was not a believer. Actually.
So you're a good person to ask.
Yeah, before last year, my only experience with VR had been in the '90s, a location-based entertainment VR experience, and I wasn't convinced back then, and I didn't even pay attention until recently, and even recently I went into my first DK2 demo skeptical, but as soon as I put the headset on, I realized how far VR has come in terms of the visuals, in terms of the audio, and in terms of just the general presentation. And now, unfortunately, words and pictures don't really help. You have to try it. I think that's probably the best advice I can give. And very soon, people will be able to try it. Everybody will be able to try it out, whether it's on Oculus or Morpheus or the HTC headset as well. And so to answer your question, is it here to stay? I hope so. I think that VR is providing an experience you simply can't get anywhere else, and I believe there's a giant groundswell of support right now when it comes to people who are ready to jump in and try it out.
Gotcha. Thanks, Ted.
You got it.